Okay, welcome everyone. So glad that you could join us. My name is Andrew Shahan. I am an autism and child development specialist, and you are joining the monthly webinars for today's wonderful webinar is on autism and food issues. So most likely you are a parent or family member of a child with autism, and you are joining us so that you can try to find out what's happening with your child around food and eating and get some support and some strategies. So welcome. I would like to start by just giving you a bit of information about me and my background before we jump in. I have been working with children with autism and families for about 30 years, and I have my background is actually in early intervention, early childhood special education, and so I've been at it for a few years. I've worked with a lot of children that have challenges around eating. And so we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to say first, as I welcome all of you, the way that the formatting of today's webinar works is that I'm going to present a lot of information. I'm going to talk a bunch at first, and then open things up for you to ask specific questions about your particular child towards the second half of the webinar. And I'm going to do my best to try to address your particular challenges around your child and food or eating, so we can have some back and forth, and hopefully you'll come away today with some information and tools that will help you address some of your child's difficulties in this area. Okay. And I will also say that in the background, behind the scenes, is our wonderful founder, Guy Shahar, who has started our amazing organization, the Transforming Autism Project, and I'm going to be referencing throughout today's presentation his wonderful book. He has not asked me to do this, and this is not a commercial, but I will be referencing many passages from this book today, so I just want to hold it up and show you. It's Guy's book called Transforming Autism, How One Boy's Life Was Renewed. And Guy in this book actually talks a lot about specific challenges he had with his own son around eating and feeding. And there's a lot of wisdom that I'm going to draw from that Guy writes about in his book. So I really recommend this to all of you as parents and family members, to read the book. There's enormous help you can find from the pages of the book. So what I would like to do is start with an important word of caution, which is this. So these are the objectives that we're going to cover today. We want you to have a greater understanding of the different issues and factors that can contribute to your child's particular food issues. Okay, and we also want to give you some specific strategies to take away, some different ways of thinking about and approaching the whole area of eating with your child, and then some different things that you can try out if this is an area of challenge for your child. So here's what I'd like to say first. It's important to recognize first that issues around food and eating can be quite complex for all of our children. And many different factors can contribute to a child's particular difficulties around eating different foods. Around whether it's that your child has very specific food preferences, food likes and dislikes, and only eats a very narrow range of foods. If it's that food and eating in general seems to be a constant control battle in the family, where your child seems very rigid and very routine based, that they have to eat at a certain time with a certain plate or in a certain area. All of these issues can have many different causes and roots, and it's very important to recognize this. And what I would say, and this is important for all of you parents that are listening, sometimes there can be a very simple cause and therefore a very simple solution. But with something that's as complex as eating, it's very important that you seek out and get the appropriate help to address these issues. I am not a physician. I am not a medical feeding specialist. I'm someone that's worked with a lot of children and families over the years who have had some of these issues. I've certainly had a lot of training over the years in autism and in different autism treatment approaches. But it is very important that you look to the medical community that you have access to determine if there are some actual medical issues that may be happening with your child that may need to be addressed in a more comprehensive way. Okay, so that's important for me to say up front, because some of the information and the strategies that are being suggested here may not actually be applicable to your specific situation, because I don't know what that situation is, and I don't know anything about your child medically. So that's important that we just say that up front. Now, like I said, there's a lot of sometimes simple solutions that I've been able to help a lot of families with. So hopefully we're going to be able to give you some ideas today. Okay. I will also say, as I mentioned earlier, that eating challenges can result from a combination of factors. And these are some of the ones we're going to really touch on today. A lot of eating challenges and food issues for children on the spectrum have a lot to do with emotions, with things like anxiety and fear that can result from some challenging experiences that they've had around food and eating, usually that are not in any way intentionally caused by the adults around the child. But it's important to understand that a lot of the issues around eating and feeding can be emotionally based. Now, I'll also say that in the general population of typically developing children, a lot of children also have challenges around eating and food. And we also have to remember that some of these issues and challenges are not in any way unique to children with autism. Okay. However, because our children with autism have particular difficulties around communicating and interacting socially with people, and also sometimes have incredible sensory sensitivities or sensory preferences, right? So they may be especially sensitive or aversive to a particular type of food, the smell of it, the texture of it, the appearance of it. So because of these issues, eating can be a much more charged and complex area for children with autism. Okay, so this is very important to understand. Now, all of us, I don't know about all of you, going back to my own childhood, I had plenty of challenges around eating specific foods. For example, vegetables. Anyone else out there not love vegetables as a child? I definitely did not like vegetables, and I was definitely in different situations by my well-intentioned parents pushed or forced to eat vegetables, and the results were not good. I did not develop, at least for many years, a great love of vegetables because my parents, because of their well-intended pressure, I actually liked vegetables even less. So I didn't like vegetables. I didn't like the texture, the taste, anything. So I avoided them much through my, I would say, my teenage years, and it wasn't until like my young adult years that I started getting, in some ways, reintroduced to vegetables, and then realized that I actually liked them, and et cetera, et cetera. So for many of us, the reason why I'm saying this is because we all have our particular sensory preferences around food. We all have particular foods that we like or don't like. And it's important to understand and recognize that for our children, these same issues play out, and with an even more complicated set of challenges because of their autism. Okay, so we're looking at the fact that eating challenges, food issues for our children can be emotionally based, right? And can also be sensory based, and can also be behavioral. So sometimes our children might learn that when they, if they hold out long enough, for example, and they don't like what's being served, they don't want to eat broccoli, for example, but they know if they just hold out long enough, eventually their parent will, their mom or their dad will pull out the crisps or the chips or the ice cream because they want their child to eat something. They may learn that they need to hold out for something more preferred. So that can be a behavioral issue that's kind of a learned way of trying to get one's preferred foods. Okay. Now, in addition, with these last two factors, we're not really going to spend time here, and also it's important to understand, this is what I was pointing to earlier, a medical evaluation or consultation with a medical professional can be really important. If your child has sometimes, you know, gastrointestinal problems, digestive problems, a really sensitive digestive system, a really sensitive system so that certain foods trigger a gag reflex or a gag response, right? This can be an issue for some children. And so if this is your child's particular challenge, it's going to be really important to get a more of a medical evaluation to really understand if some of those factors may be contributing. Motor-based, some kids can have really low muscle tone in their mouths, which can make chewing and eating that much more difficult and challenging, and therefore that much more stressful. And also, it might mean that particular foods are hard to eat if you don't have good muscle tone around your mouth. And so sometimes eating really chewy things can be incredibly difficult. So that can also be a factor for some children. Okay, so thus far, I hope this point is clear, that these issues can be complex, and we're going to try to look at the more simple factors that again, we're not going to really address medically. We're going to address more in terms of our interactions with our child and what we can do in those interactions around eating and mealtime. Okay, so this is really important. The communication and social interaction challenges that our children have with autism can make it very difficult for them to clearly convey to us, to communicate to us what foods they like and what foods they don't like. Okay, so sometimes your child may move away from the table or move away from you or push something away as a clear attempt to communicate with you. I don't like this food, Mommy. I don't like this food, Daddy. I'm stressed out right now. And sometimes with our own intentions and sometimes our own stress, we may continue pushing. And so it's important to recognize that our child's communication attempts around food and eating are really important, because our children, again, lack sometimes the vocabulary, the language, and the communication skills to look at us and say, you know what, Mommy, Daddy, I do not want to eat this food today. I don't like it. I feel kind of nauseous when I smell it. So because our children, again, can't say those things to us clearly, sometimes all they have is their behavior, and we have to remember that. So we have to really pay attention to our children's attempts to communicate with us. Okay? So remember this, your child's behavior is always a form of communication that means something very important, and there's always a reason why your child does what he or she does, including around food and eating, right? So that's what we're going to try to dial into a little bit today. Why might your child be be doing what they're doing around food and eating, okay? And here's one of the important things that I really want to emphasize here. We're going right to Guy's book and Guy's own experience with his son around eating. Now, I've never had a lengthy conversation with Guy about his son or his son's particular difficulties around eating, his particular food issues, but I know that he had very restricted food preferences. I know that that he was a very kind of fussy eater. So as a result, mealtime became incredibly stressful for Guy and his wife and their family, because they were worried, like all parents, that their child wasn't going to eat, wasn't going to get enough nutrients, wasn't going to have the nourishment that he needed to thrive. And this, you know, this is really important to not underestimate. Nothing brings up more stress and anxiety and fear for a parent than their child not eating. And I say that with incredible reverence for and respect for the emotional charge that this has for so many parents and families, right? The most important job for any parent is the survival of their child. So making sure your child eats and gets enough nourishment and nutrients is incredible. It's like there's a very fundamental, I think, deep drive, survival drive, emotional drive for parents to make sure their kid eats. And so I think this is what we have to recognize. This whole area can become incredibly emotionally charged for parents. And I've seen this over and over and over again. And as someone who doesn't, I'm not myself the parent of a child with autism. And so therefore, when I walk into a family's home, I always have to really deeply empathize with the level of fear and stress and anxiety that a lot of families are struggling with when eating difficulties arise. So this is really important to spotlight. And this is again from Guy's book. And this is where Guy did a lot of deep reflecting himself on his own emotional state and emotional reactions to his child's eating, okay? Any feeding issues needed to be handled without emotion or anxiety on our part. So Guy recognized that if he had thoughts like, oh God, not this again, he's not eating, I don't know what we're gonna do, what are we gonna do, we have to get him to eat, this is a real problem. Guy recognized that he was bringing all of that stress and all of that anxiety to the situation where he wanted his child to eat. And guess what? His son could pick up on all of that because this came through Guy's behavior. It came through in his tone of voice, in his facial expressions, in his body language. He was probably a bit more forceful and pushy around food. And so all of this was experienced probably by his son as a push. And so his son got more stressed, right? And got more anxious around food and eating, okay? So this is so important to recognize for all of you as parents. There was colossal power in how we reacted to things, not only in our behavior, but also in our unspoken thoughts and attitudes. And I'm going to keep coming back to this throughout the webinar today. So much of this has to do with how I or how we approach a child during mealtime or during any kind of eating or food situation. The more relaxed I am, the more the more calm my voice is, the less I'm trying to push or force any food onto a child, the more calm and relaxed that child will likely be around eating. Okay. Now I've had, of course, the luxury as a professional who doesn't have that same emotional relationship with, I obviously care deeply and love the children that I work with, but I don't have that same emotional survival kind of charge of I have to feed you or something horrible is going to happen. So oftentimes the success I've had with kids around changing some of these dynamics has to do with the fact that I can approach situations and be much calmer if a child's not eating. And I can introduce foods, or I can try to eat foods in front of that child. And I can be lighter and more playful about it. And a lot of that has ultimately a very different outcome because I'm not coming with that same charge and fear and anxiety. Okay. Moving on to our next point, which is related to what I just said. Many children, I hope this is not on your screen. I'm moving it down here. Okay. Many children, as I've said, can feel pressured or forced to eat in situations that are already stressful for them, where they may already feel anxious or confused or frustrated. For example, a busy school setting, a busy daycare setting. I don't know if any of you have recently been to a school lunchroom. It's not a very relaxing place to be. So oftentimes our children are already dealing with social anxiety, sensory overload because it's loud and chaotic, and then they may be pushed by a well-meaning adult to eat their food. And so this can result, again, in some stressful or negative experiences around food and eating in general, okay? And they can become, in our child's memory, very, very, very specific. So if, for example, I'm a child with autism and I'm stressed out and overwhelmed in a situation where I'm sitting at a lunchroom table, and my well-intentioned teacher is trying to push me to eat my sandwich, right? And a child is sitting next to me singing Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes song, right? All of a sudden, I start to put all of these things together because I'm really stressed and overwhelmed, and I start to associate the Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes song with eating a sandwich that I don't want to eat, which maybe, let's say, is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So every time now in the future that I hear someone singing Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes, I have a stress reaction and I start to feel really disgusted by peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So that's just one example of how all of these things, the emotions in a situation, what a child is seeing in a situation, can become linked together and become really connected to food and eating in a powerful way. Okay? So of course, then what we do when our child is seemingly not wanting to eat or refusing certain foods is we then get stressed and we push harder. Okay? Now, this is, of course, nothing that we are ever intending to cause. We're never intending to cause more stress, but oftentimes this is the end result. Okay, so when we push, our child feels out of control, feels like they don't have control around food, and then guess what happens? They push back, they shut down, they move away, they throw food, or they literally just close their mouth and shut down and refuse to eat, okay? So this is where things can get really complicated. All right, and this is also true, by the way, of course, for professionals. Some professionals actually use food quite often as a reward for teaching particular skills or getting a child to do something specific, like, you know, writing, holding a pen properly, right? The child holds the food pen, holds the pen properly, and the teacher says, "Oh, fantastic! You're holding the pen properly. Here's an M&M, or here's a piece of candy, or here's some type of food." So we have to remember that sometimes our children food has been used as sometimes as something that's rewarding. And that can also further complicate the situation because sometimes those reward foods are the only foods that then our children want to eat. So, yet another example of where things can get complicated. Okay, so that said, Now that we've talked a little bit about some of the factors that can contribute to eating challenges, food issues in autism, we're going to get into the strategy part. And what I want to say first again, just like I said earlier, these are only suggestions, and they do not necessarily apply to all children. They may not actually apply to your child or your situation. Okay, you have to take the information in and decide what fits for you, as well as consulting with all of the people in your lives who are currently helping you support your child. Your providers, your educators, your medical professionals, your occupational therapist, your speech therapist, whoever's involved. It's very important to communicate with people that are caring for your child about this issue. Okay, so determining whether or not you're going to use or apply these strategies, it has to be based on your child's age, their developmental level, right? Meaning their abilities or the abilities they haven't yet developed, their communication skills, and of course, their ability to manage their emotions and behavior, right? Because we've talked a lot about stress and anxiety around food, so your child's ability to handle or manage their own stress or anxiety can have a lot to do with whether or not they develop food issues or eating difficulties. And by the way, this is also true for typically developing children, and it's also true for adults. Many adults will either seek out particular foods or avoid particular foods as an emotional coping strategy, right? Some people eat a lot when they're stressed out. For me, it's usually the opposite. When I'm stressed out, I don't eat. So this is really important to understand that for every child, they're going to have their own package of this, right? Their own unique profile around this. So this is important to understand, okay? So work with your medical provider in really determining what of these strategies could be useful or applicable in your situation, okay? So we're gonna go with some a very important framework. And for all of you listening on the webinar, I want you to really go back to and try to reference this particular slide as much as possible, because this is really the go-to foundational approach or strategy if your child is having food issues that are not medically based, okay? We really want to support your child's positive, comfortable, and pleasant eating experiences, okay? And that sounds very simple, but as I said earlier, given all of our sometimes emotions and reactions, it's not, okay? So what you want to help your child do around food and eating is help them feel more relaxed, more calm, as physically comfortable as possible. You certainly want them to be curious and interested in food and eating in general. And more than anything, you want them to feel like they have some control. If they don't feel like they have control around eating, and you are going to, for example, shovel food into their mouths to get them to eat, this can work in the short term. If you're bigger and stronger than your child, you can get food into your child. The problem is that it usually backfires longer term. So your child needs to be able to move themselves toward food. They need to be able to make choices and decisions to try a food or be open to a food because they're curious and interested and because they're willing to try it, not simply because they're forced to. Okay, so obviously we're talking about helping your child in any eating situation feel less anxious, less stressed. We certainly don't want them to feel physically uncomfortable and less guarded and of course pressured and out of control. okay? So let's take a breath. So that is kind of the foundation. If a child is going to begin to be more open to eating more foods, different foods, eating more in general, eating more nutrition, whatever that is going to be accomplished with all of these top bullet points. In control, calm, relaxed, okay? So how do we do that? What does that look like? So we obviously want to make sure that the eating situation for our children is as calm as possible, right? And again, I will say that oftentimes what this means, and what I learned over the years, is that sometimes I wasn't aware that that the location of eating was really important. So just, for example, a child sitting at a table facing the living room or the room where everybody else hangs out was much more overwhelming socially and on a sensory level, right, than turning the child around and facing a wall or a corner of a room, right? So just less distraction, less overwhelm, less noise sometimes made a huge difference to help children calm down and just be more focused on the food in front of them. So sometimes where I sat in relation to a child would make a huge difference. Sometimes I was sitting very close to a child or across from a child, and I was in some ways encouraging them to eat particular foods. Go ahead and try that one. Oh, it's so good. Yes. And sometimes just my talking to them or my pushing or encouraging or with the best of intentions, pressuring them to eat was causing them to feel more out of control and therefore less willing to eat, right? So sometimes I needed to actually sit further away alongside of a child, not right in front of them, not right next to them. And I've seen this work with a lot of families as well. Really thinking about how much distance and how much actual interaction to do with a child when they're eating. So sometimes just putting out food in front of them and not saying anything has worked for lots of kids, right? And then, of course, the important piece is letting your child decide when they're going to eat a particular food. What I've also learned a lot is, we're going on to number 2 now, increasing your child's comfort and feelings of being in control around food. If I was eating or trying new or different foods in my child's presence or in front of my child, and I was eating food, picked up a piece of broccoli, smelled it, broccoli, delicious, and then I ate it, and I just had a great time by myself eating the broccoli, and I definitely exuded that in my facial expressions, my tone of voice, but I didn't say anything to the child about them eating the broccoli. I didn't offer it. I didn't push it. I just showed them how much I was enjoying eating my broccoli. And so in that situation, different children felt no pressure to eat, and they were very curious and interested, and they watched me. And sometimes this went on for actually weeks of them watching me eat different foods that they had initially hated and been really averse to, that just by watching me eat them, it began to open the door slowly for them to be curious and interested and maybe begin to try them, okay? So that's huge. Trying, for some children, soothing or calming background music just to create a vibe of calm and relaxation around food can be helpful. And of course, the presence of toys or objects, materials that your child likes can also make the eating environment more comfortable. Just having your favorite Thomas the Tank Engine, train sitting next to a child when they're eating can just be a very calming object that decreases anxiety if food time or eating is stressful. Okay? And here's the important piece. If your child is clearly calm and relaxed, you always want to introduce or offer new foods very gradually. Very gradually, and this, I can't emphasize this enough, because understandably, when parents start to see that their child might be open to or interested in eating a new food, sometimes the push becomes very strong. Here, try the broccoli. What about the spinach? And then sometimes it's way too much too fast. So very slowly introducing a new food. Okay, very important here. Again, we go back to control, being responsive to your child's communication attempts, showing your child that they have some control in the situation over what they eat, when they eat, how many bites they take, all of this, right? And honoring your child's refusals, very important. If your child, if I'm eating a piece of, if I'm eating a carrot or I'm always going to vegetables because obviously you guys can tell I had difficulty with vegetables as a child, and for many parents, vegetables are a huge area of desire for their children to eat more vegetables. So if I'm eating a vegetable, if I'm eating a carrot, and then I know the child is not interested in the carrot or doesn't like the carrot, and I'm eating the carrot, and I'm so good, and I look over and I see that the child is looking at me, right? I may very slowly hold the carrot out towards them, and if the child shakes their head or looks away quickly, I'm going to immediately acknowledge that that was a refusal. Oh, no carrot? Okay, that's cool. I'm going to put the carrot down. That doesn't mean I can't try to invite them to eat the carrot again in a minute, 2 minutes, but it means that I'm honoring their attempt and their communication. And that's so important, because when we honor our children's attempts to communicate with us that they don't want to eat a particular food, they feel immediately much more, in some ways, like their communication was honored and valued. So immediately this can bring the stress down, right? Oh, mommy sees that I don't want to eat that. Daddy sees, or Andrew sees that I don't want to eat that. Okay, whew, that's good. I'm glad they recognize that. So that's really important. Okay. And then expanding your child's diet thoughtfully and very gradually. And again, this is when your child is calm and relaxed. And this just has to do with kind of really thinking about that for some children, the sensory likes and dislikes piece, the particular sensory preferences can be really important in introducing, as a doorway to introducing new foods. So really thinking about what foods have similar sensory properties to your child's preferred foods. And what I mean by sensory properties is like the texture, the taste, the color, the smell. So for example, introducing green beans to a child who likes only beef jerky. I don't know if that's what you call it in the UK, but like those pieces of dried beef that are kind of chewy, would not really be a sensory, it would not be consistent in a sensory way, because beef jerky is super chewy and green beans are soft. So again, thinking about if your child likes crunchy foods, what crunchy foods could I introduce that are similar? So if your child likes crisps or potato chips, trying veggie chips or pretzels, salted carrot chips, crackers, things like that. Apples, right? Things like pears, crunchy persimmons, jicama, crunchy peaches, pureed things, right? Applesauce, pureed bananas, other foods. So a lot of parents just are amazingly creative with this. And it can be a very important area to understand that your child just has, for many different reasons, sometimes that we can eventually understand and sometimes that we can't, just particular sensory preferences around food. Now, I will say this as a way to help all of you understand how powerful this is. I want you to think right now of a particular food that you can't stand, okay? The smell of it, the texture of it, right? Okay? For me, it's liver. But when you think about foods that you don't like, a lot of us have very specific foods that we don't like, and we have very specific foods that we do like. And a lot of that comes down to our own particular sensory preferences. Some of us really love salty food. Some of us like sweet food. And we will seek out foods according to our own sensory preferences. So again, this is absolutely true for our children, and sometimes with just much greater intensity. Okay? Very important to understand. And then this is just another example of introducing foods. Some children will try new foods if allowed to explore them through touch at their own pace. It's okay to let your children, you know, explore. I've worked with many children who just need to honestly spend some time looking at and touching, and poking at or squeezing food before they're going to allow it into their bodies. And this isn't to say that you need to just put out all these foods in front of your child and let them throw them around and cover the walls with them and cover the table with them. But this is to say that for some children, being able to have a sensory experience with the food can be the opening or the doorway to being more open to literally putting, like, smelling or tasting a particular food. Okay, so here's an example of Easter eggs. A child began eating eggs only after several weeks of touching them in different ways, holding both warm and cold hard-boiled eggs, coloring Easter eggs, separating eggs, you know, egg yolks from the white, participating in that. So really, this is unique to every child. So, but keep that in mind. That sometimes, sometimes sensory exploration can really be key. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go to you, all of you. How much time do we have? Let me just pull this up and see if I can see that. I cannot. That's okay. What is your child's particular issue with food and or eating that you are most concerned about? What brought you here today? Okay. And given what's been presented, what do you think, of everything that we've touched on today, what do you think might be contributing? Anything that we've discussed today that may be contributing to your child's food issues? And then, what do you think you could do at home with your child starting today, tomorrow, to really address any food issues that they have? Okay. So what I'm going to do is close out, minimize my PowerPoint here. There we go. And I'm going to see if I can receive some questions, specific questions from all of you, based on anything I've talked about so far.
Okay. Hi, Andrew. This is Marta Iglesias, and thank you.
Hi, Marta.
Hi. Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, you're very clear.
Great. Good. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think it's it's been very clear, and there's a lot of good information there. But obviously, I do have some questions, and I think perhaps the easiest is if I give you a little bit of background of where I am with my child, and or perhaps you want me to go through those 3 key points you put up on the screen specifically, or
sure. Yeah. So Marta, just tell me what the main for you, what the main issue, problem, challenge is, and then if there's anything that has resonated with you in terms of what might be contributing, and then we can talk about strategies.
Okay, great. So the main issue for us is that our son, 5-year-old, autistic, and he's verbal, but with limited vocabulary, and but he's able to say things like "I don't like this," or you know, he can ask for things he wants to see or he wants to eat, etc. He enjoys a really good variety of foods. He's not got any issues with texture or anything. So in that respect, we really are not concerned about his weight or his nourishment, because he's a very good eater, and you know, he likes vegetables. But yeah, that's not our problem. The big issue for us is that he has huge levels of anxiety around food. So despite the fact that he enjoys it a lot, and once he starts eating and he goes past that anxiety, then he really enjoys his food and he asks for more, or he really tends to finish his plate, or you know, almost finish generally. Yeah, the thing is, when we, just before we begin breakfast, lunch, or dinner, he tends to just come to the dining table, and we say, okay, here's let's go for lunch. Or obviously we do wash hands before, and he has visual schedules that tell him what's happening, so he's really clear on what's coming. But then he still, you know, comes towards the table and sees his food, and perhaps it's something of his some of his favorite foods, like pasta with fish or whatever it is, and he still throws himself on the floor, screams, no, like it, no, don't, starts kicking, and you know, basically just is unable to kind of you know, calmly sit and start enjoying food. And what happens then is that we tend to, you know, we tried many different things, from removing the plate, counting to 5, using some kind of ABA strategies which said, okay, you know, just teach him that he's not getting full food until he's calm. We tried that. It didn't really work very well. What we try now is actually trying to be very understanding and just telling him, you know, this is really difficult for you. You know, you get really stressed around food, but you know, when you're ready, you can come and you can eat, etc. So, you know, we kind of try to show no anxiety ourselves. And as I said, we're not really worried about him skipping that particular meal. He's not got a problem with weight. But yeah, it's basically, it's been months, if not years, of this, and we don't seem to get anywhere.
Okay.
The one other thing that is actually very puzzling for us is that every day he eats lunch at school. We cook his lunch and we take it there, so actually the food is the same, but he eats it there with all his, you know, little friends from school, and from the beginning, it's a noisy place. It's you know, everyone is eating other different food, which could be a challenge, and there's lots of different smells, etc. But he just eats there and really enjoys the company of his other friends, and you know, basically finishes his lunch with no issues at all. So yeah, I don't know if you've ever come across something that's this difficult.
Excellent, Martha. No, thank you. That's very clear. And what's extremely, I appreciate all of the details, and what really stands out to me, and I've seen this situation many times, but what's important to recognize is that a situation that we would think might be more stressful, like a busy social environment with his friends, seems to actually be he seems to be calmer and more willing and able to eat in a situation like that.
Yes.
So what that tells me is there's something very specific for him that likely is getting triggered in the routine that has been set up around eating at home, that is triggering or contributing to this, because it sounds very how can I say it, very like it repeats itself in a pretty predictable way. Like you'll set up everything, wash hands, invite him to the table, and then right.
Totally, you got it. That's it.
So here's what I would say, and I would go back and ask you again to think through a lot of the points that I brought up around there's, if we think about what's going on when you're in that situation with him and when the family's in that situation with him, something about that setup is triggering for him. It could be that at a certain point, several years ago, several months ago, whatever it might be, when there was perhaps some pressure for him around eating food that triggered some anxiety, or maybe it was an ABA session around food and eating, or that they were working on certain skills at the dinner table or around eating. Something was very overwhelming and anxiety producing for him. And so what we have to try to do is really change up the environment, probably significantly for him, which means maybe you guys put the food out at the table for him, and you're not at the table. Nobody's at the table with him. He's by himself. He just doesn't have the whatever may be socially causing what feels like pressure or anxiety for him, which means mommy and daddy at the table with me, talking to me, might for him feel like stressful or pressure, even though it's the people that love and trust, the people that he loves and trusts more than anybody. There's something about that situation. So I would really encourage you guys to think about and play with different changes to that environment. And I would say probably putting the food on the table and really maybe not talking with him or not interacting with him during the eating or feeding situation might really loosen things up. And I don't know if that's it, but I think, again, you guys have to try to think about how can we invite him to eat food in a way that greatly decreases whatever is causing stress for him at the table. I think his behavior is communicating to all of you that something is not working for him about the way that the food, the eating situation at the dinner table is set up. And so that's, I think, what we have to try to change.
Okay, that's really good. Thank you. Yes, I mean we've been trying to crack this problem for a while. So we've tried things that seem to be helping, such as I thought that at school he eats at a small table with his friends, so now he's set up to eat at a little table with his little sister, and we, my husband and I, eat at the big table, and that has made things slightly better. But there's still this anxiety, triggered at the beginning. So what I thought while you were talking is that yes, we perhaps need to think about offering him some more control. Because you did talk quite a lot about control, so yes. That perhaps it's a matter of, well, look, your food is ready, it's over there, it's on the kitchen, we're all sitting at the table. Do you want your food? Maybe ask for it, because he can ask. Or maybe we could try different setups. So put it at the table and just don't say it's lunchtime. Just basically, okay, we're going to eat. Do you want to eat as well? Then here it is, go eat. If that doesn't work, maybe perhaps the food is not at the table, so he doesn't feel the pressure. It's there. It's, if you want it, you can ask for it. It's ready. It's over there on the side. We'll bring it over if you want it. Something like that. Perhaps that.
Brilliant, Marta. I love it. You're thinking very creatively about how to loosen some of these things up. One thing I would just offer is that when he has to request food, right? Mm-hmm. So when you say if you want your food, you can ask for it. That in and of itself is a demand for him that may already cause such frustration and stress. Because the bottom line is he has the communication skills. He's able to ask for the food. He's not going to lose those skills, right? You he can ask for it. The issue that he already can ask for it. It's just the requirement for him that he have to ask for it that maybe is a control battle for him, and maybe that's just too much for him. So I would say
too much.
With just the stuff is there, it's. Have fun. We're gonna go. Me and Daddy and Sister, we're eating our dinner. Have a good time. So that there's and part of what that's also giving him the opportunity to do is to actually be more independent around food and eating in general. Really important, because when he doesn't have that experience of being able to be more independent around mealtime and eating in general, a lot of our kids can develop a lot of control battle behavior. And so I really encourage you guys to think about how we can give him more opportunities for independence around eating. So I think I think I'm very hopeful for you guys, Marta. I think that if you try some of these things, that your guy sounds like he's got a lot of wonderful skills, and I think that I've seen a lot of kids work through this when we just lessen the pressure and really give more control, so that our kids have more sort of independence around mealtime and eating.
Right, and just a quick last question then. How does this kind of choice that we're giving him, like, okay, we're going to eat, you can continue to play, basically. How does that marry with the use of a visual schedule? Because basically we would have told him, or he would have seen the schedule that has, play and in park and whatever it is, and then wash hands, then lunch. How does that, do you think, how can we then convey the message that it's there if he wants it, but it's not a real demand from our side?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Marta. And the way I think about schedules is that schedules really, the most helpful way to think about schedules are that really they're just providing information for our kids. Sometimes schedules are used and are taught in ways that are saying to kids, here's what you need to do right now, here's what's expected. And so sometimes when we present schedules that way, that this is exactly what you need to do right now, it is mealtime, you're going to sit down and eat your meal, look at your schedule, it's mealtime. Sometimes the experience that our kids can have is they feel pressure. They feel like, I don't have a choice about this, I have to sit down and eat my food, and it's mealtime, and I don't really want to right now. Right? So one of the ways that I've worked with this with lots of different kids is to have the schedule be there for information. And I might say, check your schedule. Or I might ask a child, what's next? And the child goes and then they read off the schedule, and then that's it. They read off the schedule and they say, oh, it's lunchtime. And then I say, that's right. And then I just, put the plates where the child can access them, and then they get to take the plate and plant themselves at the table and go for it. So it's just information that's telling them that in our day, this is when we usually eat. But I will say this, your child's experience with schedules is that checking the schedule and looking at the schedule is more of a stressful experience than an experience of, oh, thank you, this helps me understand what I'm doing next. Then sometimes, again, it's become a control battle. And we have to think about,
yes.
Do you see the difference between here's what's next, and this is helping me understand that this is the next activity, versus, no, this is what we're doing right now. One is more of a push, and that this is what's happening, and the other is just look at your schedule. This is where you get the information about what activity is next. So that's what I wonder about with your particular, with your son. If the schedule itself that says lunchtime feels to him like a mandatory requirement to eat lunch, and it feels pushed and forced to him.
It could be.
One way to set that up differently is if you just look at the schedule and you almost use it as a family, where you're saying, I'm getting hungry. Mommy and Daddy are hungry. I'm going to go see when lunch is. And you go to the schedule and say, I see it's lunchtime next. Okay, Mommy and Daddy are going to go have lunch. You go to lunch. And then he probably looks over at you. That's interesting. But there's no pressure for him, right? You're modeling it for him, but there's no pressure. So maybe if you just change that piece a little bit, he might be much more willing.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Of course, Marta. Thank you so much for the questions. I really appreciate it. I'm going to see if there are other questions, but good luck. And thank you again for being brave and coming on and asking a question.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that anyone would care to ask? I wonder, Guy, if there are any I assume that I would get, if there was a question that was coming through in written form, I would have access to that.
I've had a couple through
Okay.
on the Excel sheet. So I'll run through them. There's a few. One of them is from May. What foods for regulating mood, please?
What foods for regulating mood? Woo! That's a very a complex question, because it has a lot to do with your own child's particular constitution, right? Their particular biochemistry and sensory profile. So I think what I've learned, my experience is that certainly there are foods that are alerting to one's central nervous system, and there are foods that are calming for one's central nervous system. So foods that are alerting, meaning that tend to sort of pep up one's central nervous system if one is crashing, are crunchy foods, right? Now, as adults, we all understand this, right? If you're at work and you're crashing, you typically will do things like drinking your beverage of choice, bubbly water or coffee or tea, or you will sometimes chew chips or crisps or nuts or crunchy foods as a way to rev up your central nervous system. As a way to calm your central nervous system down, sometimes chewy foods, like gum, or of course, occupational therapists historically love to use chewy taffy, which of course has its own additional challenges because it's pure sugar, and sometimes sugar can be very exciting for the central nervous system. So calming foods again can be foods that engage the chewing reflex. Okay, so gums. What else can I think about as chewy foods? Sometimes pieces of meat can be incredibly calming and take a long time to sort of chew through. So those are just some brief things. I would certainly say in terms of moods, I've seen a lot over the years. I've worked with a lot of kids whose hyperactivity can really be spiked certainly with sugar, high sugar foods and highly processed sugar foods. So things like candy and cookies can sometimes really almost be jacking kids' central nervous systems up to the point where they eventually crash. So always be aware that even though sometimes our kids are really going to crave and prefer highly sugared, highly processed foods, sometimes that can actually create some difficulties with elevating mood. So I've seen a lot of kids who will eat tons of sugar and literally be bouncing off of the walls. So thinking about alternatives, even though dried fruits are still can be very sugary, they're not as processed, and can be sort of better sweet alternatives sometimes, or just fruit, right? A better sweet alternative to stuff like, highly intensely processed candy and cookies and sweets. That's not probably what a lot of our grandparents want to hear, because I don't know about you guys, but my grandparents love to give me lots of sugary snacks, and I didn't have, luckily, mood sensitivity to that. So anyway, so those are just some possibilities, Guy. That's a great question. I would also refer to like nutritionists in those areas who have expertise around mood stabilizing foods for kids, because there can be great wisdom there too.
Okay, great. From Nina, my son is 11 and seems to go through phases of only liking certain foods, and then suddenly he hates it and won't eat it anymore. Is this normal?
Is it normal? From what I've seen in terms of children with autism, yes. It's I don't know whether I'd call it normal. I think in some ways everything our kids are doing is on a human level is normal based on their particular sets of unique differences. But I would say I've certainly seen it quite often where a child will have a particular food that they really like or crave or really enjoy, and then like a week later not want to eat it at all. And so I think some of this has to do with a lot of the factors that we've discussed today. Sometimes a food that took on a particular sensory preference for a child, all of a sudden that sensory preference shifts. This is, by the way, true for many kids in terms of what's really highly motivating for them in terms of like a toy or an activity. For a week or 2 weeks or a month, all of a sudden completely has no interest for the child. You know, and no one really knows why. That there seemed to be this change. So some of it is just that our kids' preferences can just change, and it can have to do with so many factors that are difficult to understand and identify. What I would say is the important thing is just to be responsive. If your child is liking a particular food and then all of a sudden they don't like it anymore, that's okay. You know, can we be calm and relaxed even with that changing response or reaction, and then, you know, offer something new or allow your child to refuse a food that they seem to be liking or interested in. What we want for all of our kids is ultimately to be able to be more sort of over time really in charge or in control of their eating experience, of their likes, of their dislikes. And I understand that this can be scary for parents because, you know, if I go back to myself as a kid, I didn't want to eat vegetables as a kid. And there's no question that my parents were terrified that I was not going to ever eat any vegetables. And so this fear of, oh no, he's not going to eat anything except crisps, is real, especially for parents of children with autism. But I would say, again, the more we can emphasize control, our children having control over their eating, over their food choices, what we're going to move towards is a child that's more self-directed around food and eating. And that's so important, because when our kids are completely dependent on us for all of their eating choices and preferences, what happens is this can really backfire over time. When you're not there to get food into your child, they are going to be more restricted than ever. And so this is really important to consider. Okay.
Okay, and there's a few more. Just time for one more, though, I think, and we can keep the others for a session later. This is from Vicky. And by the way, if there's any people on the call who have asked these questions, please feel free to jump in and ask them yourself if you would like to. What if they're PDA and flat out refuse to even look at a new food or a food that they used to eat but now won't? As he has an anxiety-driven need for control and sensory issues, and ASD, it doesn't seem possible to introduce new foods. My son only eats about 20 very specific items of food.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Sorry, I missed the parent's name, but that this parent recognizes a lot of very specific details about her child. First of all, that he's very anxious and has a tremendous need for control. That's really important, and I appreciate that she's recognizing that. So what that means is that we're going to have to, if and when we introduce new foods, we're going to have to really do it mindfully and thoughtfully and carefully, and in as relaxed a manner as possible. And it sounds like the child is actually eating 20 different types of food, which I would say is great, yay! Which is an indication that there is some a range of ability there that for some kids is not the case at all. I've certainly worked with children that who only eat, say, 3 to 5 different types of foods or different foods altogether. So the fact that there's 20 there is great. So we want to keep that and build on that. So what I would say is this: go back to the slides that we touched on earlier and see what you could try that would be introducing foods differently. And what I mean is the way you're introducing, become more aware of the way that you're introducing foods right now. So for example, if you're introducing foods by saying, here's a potato, here's a piece of potato, honey, try it. And your child's saying, ah, right? It could be that if you just change the way you present the food by simply putting the food, putting the piece of food in front of the child, putting the food on a plate, putting it on a spoon, and putting it down on the plate, and not saying anything, right? Not verbally asking or saying, please eat it, or try here, just try it. If you're not doing any of that, and you're just literally visually presenting it or putting it in front of them, maybe that will all of a sudden open a door, right? So all these different ways of introducing food, sometimes families just don't think about because you're so stressed out and you're like, I'm just trying to encourage him. So really experimenting with the way in which you're presenting or introducing a food, meaning that you can do everything from offering verbally and visually by holding a food out, or you can literally put the food in close proximity to your child and not say a word. You can eat a food yourself, delicious, and again, not say anything, not actually push or ask. So anyway, there's all of these different possibilities, right? You can if your child has a favorite a stuffed animal or toy, Thomas the Tank Engine or teddy bear, whatever it might be, you can pretend to feed the teddy bear the foods. Oh, teddy bear loves the broccoli, it's delicious. And maybe your child is going to look at that and smile and all of a sudden say, ooh, that looks fun. Now I'm going to try feeding the bear. And then your child's already picking up the food, holding it, and trying to feed the bear or feed Thomas, and you're already on your way, right? So sometimes the steps might just be a bit more gradual to get there. Okay. So I think we're probably at the end of our time, Guy. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. So I would like to say thank you to everyone that participated today. And for your questions, the questions that you sent in beforehand, thank you. Marta, for coming on the air bravely and asking so many great questions and sharing such valuable information about your own experience. So I know that that's always incredibly helpful for other parents to hear stories from other parents. So thank you for that. And Guy, of course, thank you for everything that you have, all of the work that you've done to get us to this place as an organization, the Transforming Autism Project, so that we can offer these wonderful webinars to families. And thank you for your wonderful book, Guy. And I will say once again, I really encourage all of the parents that were in attendance today participating to read Guy's book. There's some wonderful wisdom about how Guy himself went through this learning process of understanding unintentionally how much pressure he was putting on his son to eat, and how much of the eventual success had to do with his own awareness of his own emotions and his own pressure around it. So incredibly helpful, guys. So thank you. So you may not have been aware that this is where we would end up with your book or using some of your information, but it's incredibly helpful. So thank you.